Growing up on the south side of Chicago, I witnessed firsthand the injustices that plagued underprivileged communities, much like the one that I grew up in. I watched as families struggled not only to make ends meet, but for an opportunity to acquire the American dream. As a child, I did not fully understand the impact and implications of these challenges families in my community faced. But what I did understand is that everyone, no matter their circumstances, should have an opportunity to succeed. And that is why the Graduate School of Political Management is proud to sponsor the Collective 100 Black Political Power Summit here at GW. As the first and foremost school of applied politics, communications, and advocacy, we teach the how, not the what or the why. The first thing that our students learn is something that all of us in the room already know to be true, which is that politics trumps policy, no pun intended. Seated in the heart of the nation's capital, our students, and even more importantly, our African American students, learn not only in the classroom, but in campaign offices, Capitol Hill, lobbying shops, PR agencies, and news bureaus that shape the world. We all represent the tremendous progress, excellence, and achievement, as well as the unlimited potential of African Americans dedicated to the advancement of our nation. But with great power comes great responsibility. And in a world where we don't get what we deserve, but what we negotiate, and where if you don't have a seat at the table, then we must bring a chair, and if you don't have a plate, then you're on the menu, it's incumbent upon each and every one of us to be civically, politically, and socially engaged. There's a famous saying that embodies why we are all here today. You may not care about politics, but that does not mean that politics does not care about you, which we all know very well. Given the Collective's 100's goal of closing the diversity gap facing African American political candidates in 2018 and 2020, we are excited to support such an important mission. The core values of GW include the ideals of community, diversity, and service, which is why we are here again today. We welcomed our largest class in 5 years this fall, and I am proud to announce 20% of that class is African American. While the university-wide average is 8.8%, our African American students overwhelmingly come from some of the best HBCUs in the country, most notably Howard, Hampton, Morehouse, Spelman, Tougaloo College, and Bethune-Cookman University, to name a few. As a result, these students and our alumni are currently working on some of the campaigns of the candidates that the Collective supports, including Mr. Justin Fairfax, Stacey Abrams, and Ben Jealous, to name a few. One GSPM alumna who couldn't make it today, but specifically comes to mind, is Krista Jones, who is working to elect African American leaders in Virginia through the Virginia Leadership Institute. Since 2006, the Virginia Leadership Institute has been at the forefront of identifying and preparing African Americans for political leadership. A growing network of leaders and experts, VLI has prepared over 350 leaders. 30 have run for office, and 11 have won. We are proud to call Krista one of ours. As a believer in the Collective and a sponsor, I urge you all to continue to embrace your role as the next generation of African American leaders. And when the challenges come and you begin to feel weary, remember the heart of a young man from the south side of Chicago who dared to dream so big and hope so deep that despite obstacles, he would stand in solidarity with you today as a vehement supporter of the Collective. And let that heartbeat inspire, motivate, and drive you to continue to be the trailblazers and change agents for a better tomorrow. Welcome to the George Washington University, and I hope that you all enjoy the Black Political Power Summit today. Thanks.
Please join me in welcoming from MoveOn.org. She is the Senior Advisor and National Spokesperson, Ms. Corinne Jean-Pierre.
Okay, so I'm ready to vote for Jonathan McGee. That was fantastic. Well, thank you so much for having us this afternoon. Move On is extremely proud to be a co-host of this inaugural summit, and want to take a moment to really lift up and acknowledge Quentin and Stephanie for having this vision and making it a reality, and really giving a voice to the Black community, empowering the Black community. So we thank them for that. because, Move On, we truly believe that everybody should be represented at every level, especially living in this country, and having that is good for our democracy. It's essential for our democracy. So we are very proud to be part of that partnership. Just to give you a little bit about Move On and what we do, we are the largest independent progressive organization. We have millions of members across the board, across the country, that help elect progressive candidates. And also, we've spent the last 17 years being leaders in innovative online campaigning and towards progressive folks, electing progressive folks. So thank you so much. It's an honor to be here. I'm excited to see what the Collective PAC continues to do, all the great work in 2018 and 2020. Thank you.
Awesome. Coming up next is our, someone I know really closely, my wife, but also our co-founder here with the collective. Please join me in welcoming Ms. Stephanie Brown James. She will bring up additional speakers who will come afterwards. Stephanie.
Hi, everyone. We are so excited to see you here today. I know it's hard to get up and going on a Monday, but at least we have pretty good weather here in D.C., and so we're just very grateful to have you all here and to really have discussions about how we move our country forward. And to be honest, I don't know a woman who is more qualified and more able to, who I think should actually, run for office, but I know she's not going to do that, Ms. Mignon Moore, because she is a strategic thinker. She's a guider. She is a person who has dedicated her life to making sure that we have democracy for everyone, that we have fairness and justice for our communities. And just to give you a little bit of information about Mignon, she is a principal at Dewey Square Group, where she leads their state and local affairs and multicultural strategies practices. She has worked extensively in the administration of Bill Clinton, where she served as assistant to the president and director of the White House's political affairs. Most recently, she served as senior advisor to Hillary Clinton's presidential winning, I guess I can't say winning president, it should have been winning, presidential campaign in 2016, where again, she led the efforts to make sure that not only Hillary Clinton had her voice heard, but that so many of us, especially so many women, were able to have our voices heard on the upper levels of electoral politics. And so it is my great pleasure to welcome Ms. Mignon Moore to the stage to give us really some guiding thoughts as we begin our discussions today. Mignon?
Oh, this is fine. Can you hear me? Yeah. Well, first of all, let me just dispel the notion that I will ever run for office. That's not happening. That's why I'm here to convince all of you that it's your job to run for office, and I will be there to support you. And let me thank Quentin and Stephanie for the hard work that they're putting in to put this collective PAC together. The job that they're doing is not easy, so you being here shows your commitment, shows your support for them, and it also shows that you understand the importance of what we are going through at this particular time in history. And I'm sure when they birthed this idea, they never thought that they would be on the precipice of trying to change America, literally change America. So I want to give them a big round of applause wherever they are for doing this. And I'd like to echo what Corinne said about Jonathan. I think he said everything that we probably wanted to say and more. And that's the type of leadership I think that this organization is actually putting together. So thank you for hosting them, and thank you for your words, because you literally left us nothing to say. But I do want to kind of help us think about why what you're doing is so important, not just because we have an administration that might be a little bit indifferent to the causes that we fight for, not just because we believe that running for office is the sexy thing to do, but it's because we know that being in politics changes lives. It changes lives in ways that you probably will never, ever see. Having been in the administration, I think about every day all of the policies, all of the things that President Obama put in place that you will never, ever see, but that has been rolled back. And so electing good, thoughtful, committed, value-based, progressive politicians, and even training people could not be more important. And I think that as you sit in this room, you have to think about those who are sitting outside the room. I think about Melanie, who gets up every day trying to figure out how she empowers young people, how she empowers Black women. She's one of our unsung heroes, and she's going to be speaking with you later today, but her work is not easy. So I am grateful to see all the faces here. I'm grateful to see the diversity here, but I am grateful that you're willing to take your time and your energy to help change America and help make it be what it should be. And lastly, I would want to say, the scripture teaches us the race is not given to the swift, nor the battle to the strong, but to those who can endure to the end. And we know we have a fight. We know we have a fight. But I think that you are ready for that fight. So as Harriet Tubman would say to you, when you hear the dogs barking, keep going, because we got a lot of dogs barking right now. Thank you very much.
Awesome, great, all right. So we are going to hear from one more partner before we kind of jump into some of this data before we start. And I'm so excited to be working with this next speaker. We have launched a new project mostly focused on helping elect Stacey Abrams in Georgia, but raising up the issue of Black women in this country. And so we are excited to be joined by Ms. Amy Allison from Democracy in Color. They've been doing amazing work around the country, talking about the issues of representation, talking about the issues of diversity in politics. And so we're so excited to have her join us as well. I think she's back in the green room, but she'll be coming up in 1 second. But please join me in welcoming Ms. Amy Allison from Democracy in Color.
Good afternoon. I want to first thank Collective PAC, Quentin and Stephanie, and all of our partners. Democracy in Color is really proud to stand among what I consider to be the top political strategists of the country. Black voters are absolutely central and key to taking back our country. And so to be part of today's conversation, we're really grateful that Democracy in Color can be part of it. Our organization does a couple things. One is that our founder, Steve Phillips, who wrote a best-selling book called Brown is the New White, lays out, and our organization does a lot of reporting on this, the power of the new American majority. You can think of it as the multiracial coalition that elected and re-elected Barack Obama. And believe it or not, despite what you're reading on your Twitter feed or in the Washington Post, we have the electoral majority in this country, and we have the power to take back our White House and our Congress. And Black voters are essential. Black voters are the center of the center, particularly Black women, who have the highest turnout of any Democratic voters. That is right. And it's time the Democratic Party acknowledges the central role of Black voters and Black women. For us to really be able to gather together Black political power, we have to do things differently. We, as a movement of African Americans, invested in changing our politics, and we, as those in the progressive and political organizations that comprise the movements that we're part of. And for We have to be able to change tactics in this racially charged environment. We cannot have a Democratic Party leaders proposing a better deal, which is intended to be winning over Trump voters to the Democratic Party. It is, and it will be, a fool's errand, as I think there's a poll that came out last week that showed Trump supporters, in particular white women, 70% of them, even after Charlottesville, are still behind Trump. So there's more than economics that the Democrats in the better deal try to address. It is race. And so again, Black voters and Black constituents and Black community are essential to guiding our institutions forward with new analysis. So one of the things Democracy in Color did is we released a report called Return of the Majority. It's on democracyincolor.com, and Return of the Majority is a link on the front page. I'd encourage you to read this report because what we did is we took a look at what happened in 2016. There's a lot of detail there, but let me summarize for you what happened from our perspective. The Democrats raised and spent $1.8 billion in 2016. And until October, there was not a conversation about a strategy for Black voter mobilization and Black voter engagement just a few weeks out. Now, those of you who have been in politics for a while know that many political consultants without the cultural competency to deal with the new and more diverse communities, in particular Black community, also Latino, Asian American, and other communities, would say that these low propensity voters, we won't go to them until a few weeks before the election, and we'll focus on bringing them to the polls on election day. That assumption is a losing strategy, as we saw in 2016. Because there wasn't an early significant investment in Black voter mobilization and engagement, we lost in places like Michigan. So Hillary Clinton lost by 10,000 votes in Michigan. So we dug into the details and we realized that in the 2 congressional districts that border Detroit, that Black voters who'd voted in 2012, who didn't vote in 2016, in those 2 districts were over 60,000. These are voters who vote, who did not go to the polls. If the Democrats had invested in just one of those districts, I believe they would have gotten and exceeded that 10,000 votes in order to win that state. And we see that story repeating itself throughout the country. So the report that we wrote, Return of the Majority, looks at the places where Hillary Clinton's her results came within 10 percentage points of losing. And we say, what happened? And we looked at Black voters. Black voters who are, if you look at them nationally, look at us nationally, 24% of the Obama's coalition, the coalition that elected and reelected, we're almost a quarter of that group of voters. And our turnout in 2016 was down from 2012, which was 66%, down to 59.6% of eligible voters that cast a ballot in 2016. And it turned out that that drop was significant enough to contribute to or to lead to the Democrats losing in statewide contests. So in places like Wisconsin and in Pennsylvania, tens of thousands of Black voters who were already on the voter rolls, the fact that they voted in 2012 and not in 2016 would have far exceeded the margin of victory for a campaign like Hillary Clinton. So what does that tell us? The Democrats have got to get with a new program. And getting with a new program means spending their money differently. Instead of fixing their eye and focusing on winning white moderates who are not the core of the base, they should invest early and often in voter engagement for the Black community as a central voting bloc to victory so that 2018 doesn't look like 2016, that we can actually win. And we identify through the data 5 states that are the top highest priority for 2018. That's Arizona, Florida, Georgia, North Carolina, and Texas, places where there are millions of newly eligible Democrats of color who potentially could be part of the solution. And so when we go and say, look, instead of spending the bulk of a campaign on television ads which do not get people to the polls, partner with on-the-ground C3s and C4s to register and turn out voters. So Democracy in Color has been working to let the broader public know about the fact that there is a path to victory. We can win back the House. We can set things up where we win some key governorships. Andrew Gillum, who's in Florida, running. Stacey Abrams, who's running for governor, would be the first black woman governor in history, in our country's history, running in Georgia. Ben Jealous, who's running in Maryland, and David Garcia, who's running in Arizona. We have an opportunity to take states, with the exception of Maryland, we take states that have been red states and now turn them blue through these exciting candidates of color. And the increase in voters of color really means we have an opportunity to deepen and strengthen our political power as a community. So Democracy in Color says, listen, for the people who sit on these huge, and we call them out by name and by organization, who are investing in political spending, that what makes sense right now is a $500 million investment for voter engagement in the key districts and the key states that would lead to us winning back Congress and setting the stage for 2020. And to say $500 million out of $1.8 billion, it's a relatively small investment in the most loyal Democratic Party voters. And it would change so much about the future of what we're facing now. So if we have a disciplined and consistent on-the-ground operation to engage black voters, we can actually change things. I think about a state like Georgia, where Stacey Abrams is running. She has 31 organizers on the ground. They are registering and talking to voters now. So those of you who have worked on campaigns, statewide campaigns, know this is fairly unprecedented, and it's a new strategy. To have 31 organizers at this point in the campaign, when the primary is not until May, is a deep investment in engaging voters of color and voters who are going to contribute and need to be thinking about this election very differently. It also means that the way that the campaign's organized and the spending looks different. So what we're asking for at Democracy in Color is for a radical shift in priority to put black voters and voters of color, who are 47% of the Democratic Party, right in the middle of things. And in Georgia, 65% of the upcoming primary in May of 2018 are African American voters. And the majority of those, black women. So if we put our faith in our community to be able to not only put Stacey Abrams in office, who's a fantastic candidate, but to change the whole state and turn that state blue. Think about the possibilities for our future in terms of criminal justice reform and education and economic opportunities and housing, what services the state and the nation would offer to our community and to poor people. And I think we together will be able to have a path if we're able to come together with this analysis about our spending and our importance. So we're so thrilled to be part of the effort to say black political power starts with recognizing who we are and how critical our vote is in the entire national move. And whether we turn out or not, it's not like we're choosing between Trump and something else. We're choosing between voting and staying home. And so every effort, every dollar should be focused on making sure that we turn out to the polls, and when we turn out to the polls, everyone wins. So I want to just thank you so much for being part of the day.
Awesome. All right. Thank you all so much again for being here. We're going to kind of jump into some research that we've been conducting here at the Collective PAC. So tomorrow we'll be releasing this study publicly. You all are getting a sneak peek of it today, but it's really going to guide the work that we're going to be doing over the next 2 to 3 years around the country. So the name of our report is Building Black Political Power, which is also our mission, a report on African American elected representation on a state and federal level. So just a little bit about us. I know some of you all might have heard of us. This may be your first time working or coming to one of our events. So the Collective, the Collective is kind of two organizations, the Collective PAC, which works on the coordinated side, and the Collective Super PAC, which is our IE. It does kind of work around the country around, again, promoting and supporting black candidates. We were started last year. Today's our 1-year anniversary, so we'll be having celebrate. We'll be having a good time tonight at our reception, which you all are invited to, so we would love for you to join us. But over the past year, we've actually raised $250,000 to support black candidates in the work to build the infrastructure. Give yourselves a round of applause. We got a lot of donors in here. Whether it's $1, $5, $5,000, it means the world to us. And we've had over 5,000 individual contributions from folks. So right now, I think we're at 2,700 or so donors who've gone online or come to one of our events to say, hey, I want to put my money where my mouth is in our kind of work to build black political power. So kind of hopping into this study, or not really a study, it's more pulling data that we all kind of know it's out there into one place. So when we think about representation, we want to think about this not in terms of limitations of the past and where we have been, whether it was 1619, Reconstruction, the Civil Rights Act. We actually want to step into a space of dreaming dreaming bigger, right? Barack Obama opened the floodgates into our ability to understand our potential, not just at the ballot box, but moving beyond in all facets of our society. But when we look around the country, state by state, we have a drastic challenge of equitable representation. And what we know is that these numbers have been improved in Congress. We're seeing some great numbers in Congress. When we look at some of the state legislatures around the country, we look at the governor's mansions around the country, there are very few African Americans serving where we need them to be. So kind of hopping into, again, some of these numbers, African Americans represent 3% of all the elected United States senators. So right now, Senator Cory Booker, Senator Kamala Harris, Senator Tim Scott are the only 3 African Americans serving in Congress, although we know African Americans actually represent 13% of our nation's population, right? And so based on that challenge, we got to figure out some work in the Senate. When we look to the House, African Americans represent 11%. It's actually the largest kind of body of government in the country where we are actually seeing close representation in the House. This past cycle in 2016 when we launched, we actually endorsed 5 black candidates who are running for Congress. And 4 of those candidates won. Again, we mentioned Senator Harris. We endorsed now Congressman Don McEachin in Virginia. Congresswoman, currently Lisa Blunt Rochester in Delaware, who is the first woman, yes, give a hand clap for Lisa Blunt Rochester. She's the first woman and first African American to serve in Congress from Delaware. We endorse Congresswoman Val Demings, who ran in Orlando, Florida, and I'm missing one. Sorry, going brain dead. Oh, sorry, that was 4, but we also endorsed candidate Isidore Hall in California, who ended up losing his seat by less than 1% of the vote, but we got a great progressive in that seat anyway. So again, the House is doing great work, but we're not quite to where we want to be. Around the country in state legislatures, we're at 10%. So of the 7,383 elected seats in state legislatures, 707 are represented by African Americans. But the big challenge that we face as a community is how do we elect African Americans statewide? Around the country, there are 346 positions of folks who are elected on a statewide level, and right now, only 3 African Americans serve in those positions. Less than 1% of those seats are represented by African Americans. And so that is the preeminent challenge of our work in 2018 and 2020, is how do we build up enough power to actually affect change and get people to be represented around the country. So when we talk about equity and we look at the numbers, in order to reach a place of equity politically, we need 10 more African Americans serving in the United States Senate. We need 11 more African Americans serving in the House of Representatives. 275 new African Americans serving in state legislatures around the country, and a whopping 43 candidates to be elected statewide around the country. And so that's not going to happen overnight, and nowhere are we saying that. But what we do know is from the research, African American voters tend to vote higher when there are black candidates on the ballot speaking to black issues. Not rocket science to a lot of us, right? But we have the data to prove that. But there are some just really dynamic challenges around the country. We took a snapshot at Tennessee. Where African Americans account for over 800,000 Tennesseans. And in the state, that large, there's not one African American serving in Congress. When we look at Shelby County, Tennessee, where Memphis is, Shelby County is 51% African American. The city of Memphis itself, actually a little more majority African American. The 3 top positions in that county, Shelby County has a county mayor, which some may be a county commissioner in some counties, but a county mayor, they have a mayor for the city of Memphis, and there's also a sheriff. So in this town of majority black people, none of those seats are held by African Americans. And if we looked around the country in other states and cities, we could see the same thing happening. So this isn't a new phenomenon for many of us. I mean, we kind of know this stuff anecdotally, but we wanted to pull the data in one place to show folks that, yes, we had a black president, and we were so excited about that and revel in that legacy, but we have a lot of work to do down ballot. And if we don't focus there, we're going to continue to see situations around the country where we are fighting for change, advocating for change from folks who don't look like us. When in reality, and we put the example of Charlottesville. I had a conversation a few weeks ago with Vice Mayor Wes Bellamy from Charlottesville. And the fact that, we saw this crazy demonstration, the behind-the-scenes story is there was actually an African-American city councilman, vice mayor, who championed that issue of removing that statue from that city beforehand, before it was national, media, right? Before it was making headlines. And so the idea that, African-Americans in these places around the country, Charlottesville, Virginia, for instance, are actually making significant progress and change on issues that mean a lot, right? So we talk about the symbolism of the Confederate monument, but also Vice Mayor Bellamy has been doing a lot of work actually getting city funds to fund scholarships for students, to fund after-school programming, to fund criminal justice reform in the city, right? So it's not just the symbolic things, but we know that black candidates and black elected officials will actually address the issues that we want them to address from our community. Our challenge is getting more of them on the ballot, getting more of them running, and getting more of them funded and training to be successful. And so that's the work of the collective PAC and the work that I think so many of our organizations, have to commit to moving forward in 2018 and 2020. So those are the numbers, a little depressing of where we are, but there's hope, right? And before I want to jump into hope, I want to kind of talk about this other challenge of the South. The 10 most unequitable states when it comes to African-American political power are in the Deep South, right? So we look at Louisiana, Alabama, Mississippi, South Carolina, Georgia, North Carolina, Virginia, Tennessee, and Arkansas. We have significant challenges, right? So we pull the numbers and to show you what it would look like if we had an equitable legislature in the state of Mississippi. We need 13 more African Americans serving in the Mississippi legislature. That would look like equity for us to move forward. And we pull the numbers again on a statewide level and a congressional level. In a state like Louisiana, where we currently have Congressman Richmond serving in Congress, for equitable delegation to come from Louisiana, we need 3 African Americans serving in Congress and not just 1, right? And so how do we address these issues moving forward as an organization? And we're going to talk about that a little bit later today. But also, I just want to preview with you, as Amy mentioned a little bit before as well, there is hope. There are inspiring candidates stepping up to run for office as we speak. Right now, there are, and I'll come back to this slide in a second, there are 24 black candidates running statewide in 2018. You've heard some of the great names like Ben Jealous and Stacey Abrams and Andrew Gillum in Florida, but there's also folks running in Nevada, folks running in Iowa, folks running around the country for statewide positions, and it's going to be our job to not just elevate those folks, right, but to make sure they have the money to power their campaigns. We know the Democratic establishment, the progressive establishment, is going to spend upwards of $800 million in the next 16 months. We want to make sure that they have the information to know where to invest and to know why to invest. The opportunity for the progressive community and the Democratic community to take back Congress, to win governor's mansions, and to win the White House in 2020, it runs right through what we call the Black Belt, right? So in the South, in the Midwest, we know these states are going to require African-American turnout to be significantly higher than what it was in 2016 and what it was in 2014 as well. And one way that we can do that is not just through get out the vote efforts, not just through souls to the polls on Sunday, is actually through working to recruit, train, and fund black candidates to represent the values that we all espouse as an organization, as a party. And so the other great news about 2018 is we looked at the 80 seats that are being targeted by the DCCC and House Majority PAC. And the amazing great news is already 25 black candidates are running in districts that are targeted by the DCCC and House Majority PAC. And so this isn't just a conversation about, replacing current CBC members or black folks running where they can't win. We know in these districts right now that the election were held today, a generic Democrat would win. Right, just based on what we've been seeing happen in Georgia, happen in Montana, Republican Party enthusiasm right now. And so what we're saying is that, the work between now and those primaries is to do everything we can in those 25 at least targeted districts of the DCCC and House Majority PAC to make sure African Americans are a part of that process moving forward and are considered and not just kind of stifled out because maybe they don't have the organizational background, or they don't have the big names. We want to make sure folks are being taken seriously. And so that's the work of the collective PAC, the collective organization, is to elevate these races, elevate these candidates, give them a platform that they actually may not have from their own networks to be able to do that work. And so this map at the bottom here shows you all the states where we have African Americans running either statewide or running for Congress in 2018. So we're all over the country. We want to make sure that these folks again have the tools they need to be successful. And so that's going to be the work of our organization of the next year. Later on, we'll talk about actually how we're going to do that work and how you all can play a part of that work. But again, if we don't improve these numbers here, then what is it for, right? What is the path forward if we don't have folks in office actually advocating for the things that we all believe in and believe in strongly? Again, we started this organization based on a lot of the challenges we were seeing around the country with criminal justice reform. And you saw city after city, African Americans lobbying city councils, lobbying mayors, lobbying sheriffs, lobbying governors who don't represent their values to make change on issues that probably aren't at the top of their agenda. And so what we want to move from is this place of just strictly protest and strictly being on the outside to actually having advocates on the inside who we don't have to lobby, who we work to elect beforehand and know they represent our interests, and we'll go into that work on behalf of our communities. And so that is the information that will be included in our Building Black Political Power report that will be coming out tomorrow. And it would include also additional information about who those candidates are who are running statewide and running for Congress all around the country. Again, it's about 50 candidates already who have announced who are running statewide campaigns and congressional campaigns in 2018. And what we do over the next 16 months in terms of building infrastructure, in my opinion, will determine how successful a possible Democratic presidential primary contender Kamala Harris will be, or Cory Booker will be, or Deval Patrick will be, or whoever else wants to run for president in 2020. The one thing that's been missing, and I was one of the early staffers on Barack Obama's campaign in 2007. I worked in South Carolina in the primaries. And what I can tell you is, when folks are running these campaigns and getting started, and when you are a candidate of color, it really comes down to money. And where that money comes from and how fast you can get it will determine a lot of your priorities. Can we be honest? All right, can we be honest? All right, and so what we want to do is have infrastructure ready in case there is an African-American candidate who says, I want to run for president, where we have a national grassroots organization of young professional donors and established donors who can step up and write big checks and raise money, because that will give fuel to a candidate's campaign in the early stages. But also it will empower us to have important positions on the inside of those campaigns, but also in terms of policy priorities, right? We want to make sure that our priorities are prioritized with these candidates and campaigns, and the only way to do that is to play both sides of it. We know black voters are powerful decision makers. I mean, black voters will determine who the next Democratic presidential nominee will be because of, that map I showed you all in the South. Black voters will determine who that person will be. We did in 2016, we did in 2008. And so we have electoral power, but how do we build actual political power, which is not only about our votes, but also about our money? And that will be kind of discussed later on today in our presentation. But I'm going to shut up now and bring out some other experts who represent some amazing organizations around the country, who are going to give you a little bit of a layout of where they are thinking about these challenges of representation. And so before I do that, I want to introduce, reintroduce our lovely partner and co-founder, Ms. Stephanie Brown James. Thank you all.
Thank you, honey. Okay. Doesn't Quentin look good today? As his wife, I always have to say how yummy I think he is, even though he hates for me to say that, but if I have a platform to lift him up, that's what I'm going to do. So we are very excited to get into the conversation portion of our summit. And this really is going to be a conversation. It's going to be led by some dynamic panelists, but we will make sure that we have enough time to have conversation with you all as well to get your thoughts, because this really is a part of the program where we talk about let's get ready for 2018. Let's get ready for 2020. It's never too early to do so. And really, what is the state of affairs of Black civic engagement today? Are we in a position to be ready to turn out the Black vote in droves in 2018 and 2020? And so with that, I want to introduce our fantastic moderator for the afternoon. She is dynamic, she is visionary, and she's just a really, really good person. And I think it's good to say folks are good people nowadays. Ms. Jessica Bird. And come on out, Jessica.
Hey. How are you?
Jessica Bird is the founder and principal strategist of 3 Point Strategies, which is a consulting firm that focuses on a myriad of things. One of the things I feel like Jessica is great at is making sure that people who are running for office, especially Black women, are prepared to win their races, not just run, but actually win. She worked with Tashara Jones in St. Louis recently, Yvette Simpson, who will be the next mayor of Cincinnati, Ohio, which is major. Jessica makes all that happen and is really the behind-the-scenes kind of guru to make sure that we have diversity in elected representation of African Americans. So with that, I want to turn it over to Jessica, who will then introduce our fantastic panel, and then we'll make sure, again, we have enough time for questions and comments from the audience. So.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Let's give Stephanie a huge round of applause. So I feel like folks have been they've been pretty buttoned up, and I just want y'all to get your shoulders loose because I'm about to dig into this conversation and ask some really hard questions. Are y'all ready? Yes. It's Monday. I've had like 4 cups of coffee. I'm ready for y'all. Are y'all ready for this conversation? Yes. Are y'all pissed off? I'm pissed off. I'm angry. There are people with tiki torches like down the street from us, okay? We don't have enough black political representation. We heard all of these crazy, scary numbers. Do y'all believe that Black Lives Matter? Yes. Do you believe that black voices are needed at the table? Yes. Do you believe that policy is important because our families deserve good policy? Yes. All right. So the people I'm about to bring out are at the forefront of making that happen, of making sure that not only there are voices at the table, but that we are stopping stupid and blowing out those damn tiki torches because they don't belong in our communities, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to shout out these incredible panelists, and then we're going to jump right into dialogue. You're going to get a chance to ask questions, so I want you to be thinking. They should be hard questions, my friends. Very hard questions. All right, so without further ado, I'm going to bring out my brother and mentor, Brandon Davis from GPS Impact. We have the incredible Melanie Campbell, who's the president and CEO of the National Council on Black Civic Participation. Derek Johnson, who is the brand new interim president of the NAACP. A huge round of applause. We have Ifeoma Ike, who's the Deputy Executive Director of the New York City Young Men's Initiative. Ifeoma. We have Judith Brown Dianis, who's the Executive Director of the Advancement Project. And last, but incredibly not least, Joshua Dubois, who's the founder and CEO of Values Partnerships. And y'all may have remembered that Josh was the one who sent our beloved former president Bible verses every morning. So I'm actually glad you're here because I feel like we need a word every once in a while. So what we're going to do is I'm going to ask each of you a question, and then you should feel free to use these mics. And then we're going to jump into dialogue. The audience is going to ask us questions. Are y'all ready? Ready. Let's do it. These are the folks who knew what was coming in 2016. They tried to shout it from the rooftops. I heard a few of them. Many of them have trained or managed or been a part of work that you all are a part of. And so we want y'all to be honest with us about what's needed, what we're going to build, and how we can move forward. So I'm going to start with you, Derek. Brand new interim president of the NAACP, one of the nation's largest civil rights organizations. I want you to just jump us right in. So right now, we're preparing the black community. We're going to activate them to get out and vote. What needs to be done? What are some of the methods we should employ?
Well, thank you, Jessica, and hello, everybody. One of the things we have to do is zero in on the title, Black Civic Engagement, not political party civic engagement, and stop carrying the water for either political party, because at the end of the day, we're not the tail and the party is the dog. We're the dog and the party is the tail. And political parties are vehicles for agendas. And far too often we accept other people's targets and methodologies to get out our community, when in fact we should be creating our own targets. What's viable? Where are the opportunities? In Jackson, Mississippi, people say Chokwe Lumumba could have never won. Mm-hmm. He won with over 70+% of the vote. This past year, people said that his son, Antar Lumumba, will be in a runoff. He won with over 57% of the vote. It's when we make a decision and we focus, we can turn out our base. Another key thing we got to do, black infrequent voters during presidential elections can make a difference during midterm elections. If you look at many states, African Americans who vote during presidential elections far exceed the percentage of whites in those same states. In Mississippi, for example, and I use the state that I live in, 63% of African Americans voted in the last presidential election. 52% of white folks voted. 40% of all ballots that were cast were by African Americans, and yet African Americans make less than 35% of the voting age populations. We outperform our weight. When we get to midterm and state elections, we drop down to 34%, and they drop down to around 40 to 42%. Our target should not be based on a political party scheme that's been informed by consultants that's been spending $1.3 billion in consulting fees for these elections. Our target must be informed by where do we have the greatest opportunities to turn out the vote and stop falling for the trick of getting the voter registration money in the last 30-day money and start looking at how do we identify infrequent voters during midterm elections and turn them out from our community, by our communities, using our institutions.
Yes. So I want to bring Melanie into this conversation. So we talked about, Black voters. Let's talk about Black women. You've been, the leading cutting edge on getting Black women to the polls. What is it going to take, and how do we center Black women's voices?
Thank you, Jessica, and thank you to our good friends over there, Stephanie and Quentin. Thank you so much for just stepping out there and leading, right? I think we'll step back for a second, because when we looked at what happened in 2016, Black women, I say it and I live it and I mean it. We are the secret sauce, but we're not being respected in that way. So we always talk about leveraging our vote. We leverage our power. We leverage. So come up with those who know, we got to come up with we got to power shift. We got to shift our power and leverage it in a different way. I went to some of these meetings, that's been going on, and we've been pushing the party, the Democratic Party specifically, in my lunchtime hours, because I'm, 501c3. I do take more lunches these days, so I can say more.
So if you see her outside, just lob
I'm on lunch
in.
break right now.
Right.
It's not about just going and hiring up a bunch of African Americans to work at the party, because it's not the first time that's happened, right? It's about respecting the role of Black women's leadership, not just to be a commodity, but we also have to decide that we don't want to just be a commodity just to get somebody elected. Yes. And I loved, and love our past president, right? But I've lived in this town more than I want to have been when I came, and lived through Democrats, Republicans, and Democrats running this country, and Black women are still not getting our respect. And so there's some stuff that's going to come out next month that's going to show. When we do a poll with Essence every year. This is our third year, and so September 20th we're going to release that poll, and it's going to be a little shocking to folks. Some of it was shocking to me. It's embargoed, but I'll just tell you, it's going to state what we already know. Black women are in a different place in space about that we're not going to continue to be disrespected. And so if you're serious about it, you're going to have to invest in that vote in a different kind of way. And it's not just voting, it's about who's making the decisions, right? Who are the white guys behind the curtain making all the money and making bad decisions but still getting paid? Right? Mm-hmm. That's just the reality. I've spent a lot of my years before I came to D.C. in Georgia, in partisan politics, under Maynard Jackson and all those kind of folks, right? And understand that who's making these decisions, this stuff has been going on too long. And the problem is we're losing progressive politics in this country. When you look at the numbers, he pointed out the opportunities, right? Mm-hmm. In Georgia with Stacey Abrams and these others, where are you going to invest? We have the numbers when it comes to, when you look at the South, it started in '96 when they did the 17 battleground strategy, and it's gone down damn hill ever since. And so we have to make a decision ourselves as Black women, but also challenge the whole structure to understand that if you don't respect us, we can do something very different. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what I'm hearing, and folks even threatening independent. And I understand all of especially in an institution of higher learning, right? To understand that, if you vote independent, then you can't make a decision. Oh, that's great. But you have a really growing underbelly of people saying, well, maybe we need to do something very, very different, including myself. Mm-hmm. We can't keep doing this and losing, and our people are dying in the streets, and so.
Y'all think we need to do something
power
different?
Shift.
Yes. So actually, since you said so much quotables, like Black women are in a different time and a different space, which I think y'all know, right? I also want to remind you that we can be tweeting at BlackRepresent17. We also have a webcam. Hello, everyone who's watching from their desks right now. And so we want to bring them into the conversation. And I want to keep it going with Brandon, because you've been inside, you've been outside, all around this particular infrastructure that we're building. So let's talk a little bit more about this new role that you've been occupying the last year at GPS. One, we want to hear about GPS, but also you're doing both online organizing and offline. So let's talk about what that bridge is like.
Sure. I think I want to start with what I think is the value of technology in this moment. I think, I agree with a lot of what's been said about what we have to do in 2018 and how we have to engage the electorate in 2018. I work for a firm called GPS Impact that is a firm based in the Midwest and operating across the country, trying to bring an approach to digital that doesn't make it a magic wand, but situates it where it should be in the larger strategy, and as part of the larger strategy, but also with a close to the ground attitude toward it. But I think that the opportunity in this election and the challenge in this election are similar. The world is upside down. And it's totally discombobulated. And there are very few of the traditional power centers that remain in charge. And what that opens up is an opportunity for new voices, new energy, new conversations. But what we also have to do is figure out how to knit together those new conversations with the conversations that have been ongoing for a while. There are a lot of things that were unique to 2016, and there are a lot of things that predate 2016 by almost 2 decades. That are challenges that we face, and we have to figure out how to address them both dually. I would say that one of the biggest challenges when you think about a midterm election, and if you think about this election and its connection to 2020 and 2022, we are in that window of legislative control, legislative power, presidential power, and redistricting power. And the three of those together will largely define how the next decade or two looks. And so this is a critical moment, as we all know, and, it's too early to be on this is the most important election of our lifetime, but eventually people will start to say that. But they all are. The fact of the matter is it just happens to continue to be true each one after each one. This year, I think there are some unique opportunities, beginning with reach. I don't think that you move a segment of voters who have not shown up in 2010 and 2014 with the same set of tactics that we've engaged in 2010 and 2014. I think we have to have a new way of approaching it. And I am not one that goes about blaming the voter always for not showing up. I think we have to do a better job of giving voters a reason to show up. There was a lot of money spent in just one example in Detroit, Michigan in 2014. And what we saw turnout, even though a lot more was spent than in 2010, hold pretty steady with 2010. One of the things we have to look at is what reasons are we giving people to go out and vote. We're very good at the science. We have to think a little bit about the art of it as well, and giving folks a reason to go out and vote. I think that our voters are both disenchanted with both the options in many cases that they have, but also with the way government runs. We have a whole generation of folks who voted, many of them for the first time in their lives, for a once-in-a-lifetime transformational candidate, and then they got a chance to see what the limitations are on power of the presidency. And that is jolting in an environment like this. And so I think what we've got to do is we have to, one, have a compelling message, a compelling way to talk about where we're trying to take the country, whether that be through a Black civic engagement lens, through a broader progressive, or through the lens of candidates who will be running on the issues that we have to do that. We have to be compelling. We have to talk both about things that affect me personally, uniquely, like policing reform, but also the things that affect me broadly as a 40-year-old man with a wife and a daughter. I care about the economy. I care about taxes. I care about education. I care about all of that, and I want to understand where we're going. The other thing that I think we have to do is we have to give folks some sense that voting matters, that if I vote, somehow that will translate to an outcome. And that's been hard to do at the federal level over the last several years. So I think we have to look further down ballot. And then the third thing is that I think we have to not only connect the dots across our different strategies, which we all know, but I think we have to move away from a level of micro-targeting that has us speak to less people And we need to be more about macro targeting with the right conversation and the right message that allows us to talk to more people. You may win elections with a deeply micro-targeted effort. You may, but it's really hard to change the politics of the country. It's really hard to govern. It's really hard to mobilize people on the other side of the election if we haven't talked to them. So I hope we get a chance to talk about who some of those groups are. But I think technology can be an effective means to expand the scale. Just today, we're talking to more people than are just in this room. I was here in January, I think it was, for a conversation with the DNC chair candidates in the African American community. We can talk to a lot more people if we use it strategically, but it can't just be a short-term conversation. It's got to be a continuous, ongoing conversation to move people to action.
Awesome. So Judith, I want to bring it to you. So, we've heard now we need a compelling message, we need to center our voters, and we need to open the floodgates, right? So you're leading the Advancement Project, which is an incredible organization that tries to make sure that those floodgates can actually vote, right? And so I want to make sure that we're bringing into about the challenges on our path to civic engagement. So can you tell us a bit more about your work in leading the Advancement Project, but particularly voter suppression efforts and the way that we're combating voter suppression?
Sure. Well, again, thanks for having me, and it's good to be with my people up here on the stage. So Advancement Project, for those who don't know us, we are a racial justice organization, national in scope. We are pretty well known for our voting rights work. We were counsel to the North Carolina NAACP in the voter suppression case in North Carolina. We've also won voter ID in Pennsylvania. We work in several different states, and what we do is that we work with grassroots groups because we believe that accountability has to happen at the local level. We're kind of like the Ella Baker of legal organizations.
Yes, Ella Baker.
And we also do communications work. And so in our work over a number of years, what we have been finding is that there are barriers to the ballot. What it is that what we are seeing, and we've been seeing probably, I would say probably heightened when President Obama ran the first time, definitely in 2011, was that there was this continuous barrage of laws that were being passed across the country to make it harder to vote. Clearly, the Republican Party, who I will call out by name even though I'm from a nonprofit, they are the ones who engage in making it harder to vote and restrict access to the ballot. And what they were doing was just passing laws that they knew were surgically crafted to hit African American and Latino communities in particular, because they don't want us to vote. The handwriting has been on the wall about the demographics shifting in this country, the turnout of Black women in particular, who, they know are not voting for the craziness that they're putting out there in terms of policy. And so what they've done is, it's like what my daughter used to do when she's now 15, but when she was little, was that when we play a game of Uno, we'd get down to the last two cards, and she would change the rules on me. And all of a sudden it would be like, well, when you're getting ready to put the last card down, you have to call Uno in motion. And if you, so.
My godson literally just did this to me like 2 weeks ago.
That's what you do, right? It's like, if you know you're not gonna win, you're like, hey, let's just change the rules. And so that's what the GOP has been doing, is changing the rules. And being able to be in control of state legislatures has allowed them to do this. And so we have seen over the past year, again, a number of states that were passing voter ID laws. What they've also done is made it harder to register people to vote, because they didn't want voter registration groups to do the work of meeting in communities and really building relationships on the ground. The other thing that we're seeing across the country is the number of places where they are consolidating polling places. Like, this is really like in the weeds stuff, but hits us the most, right? If you decide that we're gonna take away 5 polling places at those churches where people have voted for 20 and 30 years, and everybody goes out on election day back to that church, because I've been in that community for forever voting at the same place, and all of a sudden it's not there, I'm probably not gonna go look for the new place, or I'm not gonna go get in my car, or I'm not gonna take the bus. And so the consolidation of polling places to like kind of macro sites is really hurting Black communities. The other thing that we should expect is that this president, and I've never referred to him and his name in the same sentence as president and that name, he, in particular, made, some people call it dog whistles, I call it a bullhorn, right, about voter fraud. And what he was doing during the campaign is that he was setting it up for a discourse around voter fraud by undocumented immigrants who, by the way, don't vote. Okay, if people, undocumented folks, often live in the shadows and they're not trying to go into a voting booth in order to have some political power in a country that they know wants to send them back home, right? And then you've got black folks. He kept talking about particular cities where there was voter fraud. And those were cities where there are a majority of black folks in those cities. And so what he was trying to do was ramp up this discourse about the myth of voter fraud, because in their world, if you say it enough in Fox News style, it becomes the truth. And so to criminalize and make those criminals people of color who are apparently trying to steal elections. You know, if we were trying to steal elections, I think we would have better outcomes than what we have seen, okay? So to make us the people who are robbing democracy, when in fact it is them who are doing it through structural changes, right? And then they put out this new commission, the Pence-Kobach Commission, which really is about how do we continue this discourse about voter fraud, but then make it policy. So we should be very afraid of what is going to happen in state legislatures as they start to purge people, as they start to move towards more voter ID restrictions on voter registration, and realize that it's all about us. And just in closing, I think the things that we need to be doing to fight back litigation, like we do, has become all of a sudden a really good tactic. Number two is that at the local level, local election officials have incredible discretion. And so we need to be watching what they're doing, but we also need to be running for office, to be the local supervisor of elections, the clerk of the registrar, et cetera, because there is incredible power and they are the ones that will make decisions that will impact us on election day.
Yes. So I'm not trying to put folks on the spot, but I know there are a couple candidates in this room. If you're running for office right now, will you raise your hand? Yes, yes, yes. Awesome. We want you to run, we want you to win, we want you to build Black political power. That was awesome. So Iffy, I want to bring you into this conversation. And you wear a few hats. Your work in New York City for the Young Men's Initiative, and also in leading and founding Black and Brown People Vote, and all of your work at the intersection of like young people and urban organizing. Like, let's bring in that layer of the work. What does it mean to be actually working in coalition with young people, and also to be thinking about like all of our identities?
So first of all, how y'all feeling? I'm tired. I'm tired for a couple of reasons, but I do want to take a moment and honor Stephanie and Quentin, the fact that they literally brought what may be the future president or the future movement leader or the future deputy or whatever into this world while organizing this space is not an easy thing to do. So if we can just clap one more time for their effort. What we just did just now is a form of honoring, which I think is something that we have to incorporate when we're trying to build. What I love about, what is frustrating as we were just hearing some of the legal issues is that being trained in both research and law, we're not lacking knowledge. We know what is coming and attacking us. It's actually evolved ever since we were present here, even before a Dred Scott case, right? When I speak to my students about what's the only thing worse than being listed in law as not being a full person is being invisible. And that was the reality of the state of Black people that did exist here before law started codifying our existence. So we really haven't had free space in this country. And I put that out there because
the thing that has kept us free has not in entirety, it's been a tool and we've used tools and strategies based off of our knowledge of the current legal and political strata, but bigger than that is what we came into this country with, right? Which is way more indigenous and way more authentic, I think, in how we need to look at building towards 2018 and 2020. So very quickly, when Jessica started off by asking y'all, are you guys mad? I think in a lot of ways that's where I'm at, but looking at anger as a fuel. Yeah. And I think in a lot of ways, what I've seen in the current movements, and I will also say in a lot of established places, there are people that have fuel, right? When I worked on Judiciary Committee, Conyers as senior as he was fighting. We worked on that Detroit emergency manager situation, even though it was very local, because he recognized that if we don't address that, we are now seeing what's happening in Flint, right? But nobody hears about the work that he's doing. Nobody hears about some of the work that Melanie is doing on campuses right now with young people to try to get them to educate each other on a very organic way so that we can have shared knowledge. So I share all that to say that the knowledge of how they're trying to basically wipe us out is not new, but the strategies of what we need to do to win are also not new, and we have them. And I think that I just want to leave some ideas on the table as to how we better elevate the strengths that we have, which is not just a millennial thing, but how we also look at the today voice and see how we can use that to our advantage. So before moving forward, I will say that I asked some of these questions with my personal community, and I see some of those folks in the community here, and they had some strategies that they wanted to raise as to what is it that we need to do. So Marilyn Jackson, she believes that the focus needs to shift to digital literacy, and we heard some of that here about the power of data. I personally am also tired because I've spent 2 weeks in a data training seminar focused on increasing the number of data analysts in the field of civic engagement. I don't know if Jamal Binkley King is in here. Yeah,
shout out
there
to Jamal. Yeah.
Jamal literally, tirelessly, and in some ways invisibly behind the scenes has been working on how we create resources to make sure that anybody, whether you've been formerly had contact with the court systems, mothers, people of color, trans members, veterans, persons with different abilities, we are talking about the things we need to do, but we don't do a good job at identifying who's really on the margins. And the reality is when we have these conversations, the reason why we are like, hey girl, hey bro, how are you, is because we do tend to also be insular within our own Black community. So part of it is how do we find ways to bring more people into that conversation? And then what are the tools that we need to equip more people with the tools that we have, right? Because in some ways, we can also in some ways be elitist with the things that the knowledge that we have, if we're honest with ourselves. So she had mentioned digital strategy. Erin Jones, who was the first Black woman to run for statewide office in the state of Washington, and mind you, lost by 1%. She raised the concern for the establishment to invest not only in candidacies, but in the pathway and the pipelines to become a candidate. And that means starting way younger or way earlier in identifying talent within our communities. So what's frustrating is a lot of the people or a lot of the millennials that get seen as they're being too loud, they're being too critical, they don't understand how this works, are the people that we actually should be saying with a little bit more coin, they could probably be, on the school board. They probably could be the city council member. They probably could be the mayor in their 20s or 30s because it happens right now. So I think we have to have a little bit of an identity shift as to what is talent. And when we talk about we need people to run, what is the investment that we need to make on a communal level for those individuals that are stepping up and saying, I may not necessarily agree with the two-party political system, but I am a leader. And I do think we have to acknowledge that there are leaders among us, and it's not necessarily limited, thank goodness, to gender, race, orientation. We can actually have more inclusive and representative representation. Youth minister and former co-laborer, Rev Russ, I see you over there. I don't think I can work with him anymore because I curse too much. But in the faith-based space, which I know that Joshua will talk a lot more about. But one of the things that he had raised was being honest about the fact that we have to move beyond just a hashtag message. And I think that that's a very honest critique about there is a way that young people communicate right now that is both effective, but it also in some ways has a limiting, it also can turn into trendy conversations that don't always lead into action. And I will also say that in some ways, that strategy, which in many ways was used in movement building to align and do coalition building, has been co-opted by political spaces as a way of branding and messaging to millennials, completely missing why millennials, especially in Ferguson and in Palestine and during Arab Spring, were using these hashtags to basically keep safe and to support leadership and in some ways to avoid being tracked when they needed to be safe to do their coalition building. So I do say that somebody had mentioned that messaging matters. Messaging is so crucial, but we also need to recognize that messaging and labeling communities as disenfranchised voters or disinterested voters also psychologically has a weird way of connotating you're not important until you do X, Y, and Z. So we need to actually find ways of elevating and identifying the engagement that's already happening within our communities, honoring that engagement that's happening in our communities, identifying them as leaders to be a part of this strategy of winning, and then connecting that vote and that engagement to their bodies, something that's tangible. So it may not look like you need to have this person in office because she's a black woman and you're a black woman, but it may look like you need this person in office because you take 3 buses to get to work today, and I want you to take 1. Right? So we actually have to start breaking down how it matters to people's lives and what the why is, not just that we need to win. Finally, I also want to raise, and I see her here, my data analyst sister, Chinasa, who also talked about that engagement is should not only be insular. So I think what's also been great that we've been seeing in the millennial work, and even with the Women's March and some of these other cross-mobilization spaces, it's not something new. Freddie Hampton was not killed because he was a Black Panther. Fred Hampton was killed because he started moving beyond the Black people. And that is power, right? When you have poor white farmers saying, I don't know nothing about, this liberation or if whether or not Blacks should even have the same Second Amendment right as myself, but I do know that I'm poor. And I do recognize poverty, and I do recognize that the people that be or the powers that be are not necessarily looking for my interests either. And I do think that that's actually not the white working class agenda, because I'm going to put that out there, that's what it's been branded as a foci and on both the left and the right. I actually think we need to look at a poor person's agenda or a marginalized agenda. And I think we will recognize that we actually have more tools within our community as to how to leverage all communities in moving forward in the political system. So I'll end there, but I'm excited to hear what your questions or what your thoughts are about how we move forward. But I do want to elevate that the reason why I didn't want to come in here with just my own thoughts is because for me, step one is if we're trying to figure out how we engage community, you have to start with community first. And I don't think that that's something we utilize, especially in traditional political spaces, even amongst people of color. Sometimes we think we're the sole experts. Sometimes we think we know all the answers. We need to start turning power on its head and start with you all first, and then go forward into what are the tools and the strategies that we need to win.
Yes. So we're going to bring in Joshua, but I also want to remind you, continue tweeting. There were so many beautiful gems in there. Joshua, I feel like you're kind of a little bit of a magical unicorn in that a unicorn sighting right here on this stage. You could call President Obama. You could call Oprah Winfrey, maybe even Denzel Washington, and any pastor in this country, and understand what their parishioners and what the folks in their pews are thinking and dealing with. And I think that's pretty specific intersection of culture and faith. And so I want to bring that into our conversation. Why is that even important? There are these new conversations about just leaving faith behind. Yeah. What does that mean to you, and how is that infused in our strategies?
Sure. Well, it's centrally important, and it certainly goes beyond souls to the polls at the last minute right before an election. So I want to talk about the faith community, but I want to come back to something that my sister said. Again, Joshua Dubar, run a company called Values Partnerships. We produce films and television shows and run marketing campaigns for films with social impact. We work with Paramount Pictures and the History Channel and Oprah Winfrey Network and others. But we do all of that, in part at least, so that we can invest in black people on the back end of that. And one thing that I think is essential, and I will talk about the faith community, is black people have to do a better job of giving other black people our money. And black people have to do, and this is a family conversation, and have to do a better job of not making every black candidate bend over backwards to get our support.
Seriously.
I was.
I'm not playing. He can be a magical unicorn,
listen,
but your candidates don't have to be.
I'm not in the White House anymore. I can speak my mind, and I also, going back to the first question that Jessica asked, I'm a little bit angry too. I'm angry because of what happened to Tashara Jones in St. Louis, right? I'm a little angry because of what Stacey's having to do in Georgia to get the support of the African American establishment in that state. I'm angry that Yvette Simpson has to go through what she's going through with pastors and civic leaders and others when there's a qualified black woman running for mayor in Cincinnati.
Hello.
I could go on and on and on. We have to stop making folks convince us of every little detail in a way that we don't even ask for other candidates sometimes. If Quentin and Steph call me about something, or if I see Jessica post something on Facebook, or, within the boundaries of my capacity and time and finances, if it makes sense and if it's a qualified black person out front, I'm going to be behind them. Within the boundaries of what I can do, right? I mean, we can't do everything, but over and over again, I remember this from South Carolina. I remember campaigning for our former president in the primaries, and we did 40 days of faith and family. And some of the things that I would hear from, whether it's a pastor, and I love our black church, and I think they're dynamic and powerful and much more active than a lot of people assume. But whether it was, a few pastors or some civic leaders, NAACP presidents, Urban League, whatever the case may be, sometimes their arguments against a black candidate running for president would be more caustic and skeptical than what we were hearing from folks outside of our communities. And we see that we're seeing that right now with Stacey Abrams. We have the people, we have the brilliance that's already out there. But whereas we were, thankfully ready to give Barack Obama our $25 or our $50 or our $5, I have dear family that I've challenged in Atlanta because where are you on Stacey Abrams? I think we have to start with what we can do, and what we can do and what is mobilize the resources that we have behind the candidates that are already out there, particularly the black folks that are out there, and particularly the black women that are out there. And that's what we're committed to do, just as separate from our formal business, but the causes that we like to invest in, including this collective PAC. I mean, this is phenomenal. Steph and Quentin have shaped this thing from the ground up in a year's time without the formal support of some institutional partners that should be behind them.
Yes.
Is the DFCC here? Are y'all here? D-Trip, DNC, are y'all here? Where are they? We're building black political power. Where are they?
I told y'all we were going to get fiery.
Listen, we have, when in some of these forward-looking conversations, we often act like we have to build all new structures and come up with new ideas. And quite frankly, these ideas aren't mine. These aren't certainly not my organizations, but I am committed to investing in who's already out there because there are brilliant people already out there. So I haven't talked about the faith community. I'm sorry. We'll come back to that.
It's fine.
So anyhow, I think that is where we have to start. I think churches are an essential part of that. First off, shout out to the National African American Clergy Network and Dr. Barbara Williams Skinner. We provide their infrastructure and support for this amazing group of black pastors, Reverend Otis Moss Jr., Tita Wood Smith, and others that are out in the forefront of social justice and mobilizing folks to vote through the mechanism of the black church. We have to start earlier in churches. We have to coordinate with them on voter registration and on issue-based stuff. We, right after the 2016 devastation, we started doing a monthly briefing call on issues, on housing and on criminal justice and on the environment and so forth, so that churches can feel like they know what and can actually know the landscape and the issues that they're voting for before someone shows up and asks them to lend their church vans for a GOTV effort. So I think we have to start with the issues, move into voter registration, and quite frankly, we also have to tap into our faith-based communities for political giving as well. I say again, black people need to give other black people money. If every first-time voter who supported Barack Obama and gave to Barack Obama gave to black candidates in this country, I'm sure there's some data and analytics folks who could provide some evidence for this, but I feel like we would be in a much better place than we are right now, and part of that is through the church. We saw, and for the first time with candidate Barack Obama in 2007 and 2008, pastors give, and they gave, collectively hundreds of thousands of dollars. I think that can happen again, and would encourage folks out there representing faith-based communities to think about how you can support candidates financially as well. So,
awesome.
A few different ideas there.
How y'all feeling? Good information. All right, so I want you to be thinking of your questions. I'm going to ask you all one big question. Before we get into audience questions. So someone in this audience, maybe watching us, has a $100 million check. One of y'all got $100 million. So we always talk about this, like what's not working, what's hurting us. And right now, for many of us that are connected to the internet, we're glued to all of the things that make us feel really small and really bad. But there's work that's happening that's working. And someone is going to hand us a $100 million check when we get off this stage. What should they invest in? What is working? What is winning? What is advancing black political power? I mean, I know this dress is working, but I'm just saying, like, other than that.
I don't know that it's one thing. I don't think it's one thing. I think there are the question for me is how do you invest in several things and how do you have them come together? So the notion of infrastructure and what it means to invest in infrastructure, I would argue that it is organizational and there's a set of capacities that need to exist in order to run the types of campaigns and efforts that build power. You need communications capacity, you need research capacity, you need data, both housing management and analytics capacity, you need fundraising capacity. So I think there's a set of capacities that if we're operating in all states would give us a much better ability to build lists and cohorts and organize those in a way that communities are really taking, the community voice is what's driving the conversation. So I think infrastructure in one bucket. I think the second is though this a little bit more abstract shift in the overall conversation. I think Josh talked a little bit about it. We got to change the way that we are portrayed in these conversations, both as voters, our level of interest and this sort of assignment of blame for whether or not engagement is actually done in a way that would motivate a voter, but also changing the narrative, the conversation. We need to own more. If we don't own new media companies, we need to figure out ways to use the media that's available to us. We have new tools in the digital space to be able to organize and drive conversation at a higher level. And I think we need to be driving more of those conversations. We need to create some publishers of last resort when we can't get articles published or when we can't move news through the traditional means. And then the third leg to that stool for me would be identifying, training, and driving both leadership development as activists and as practitioners, but also for candidates. Yeah. And I think if you put those three things together and invest in them at scale, you probably need another 50 million or so, just to be real. But you can really, I believe that those are the investments that I think give you the greatest opportunity for both immediate impact, but also a long-term way to shift what we're dealing with right now.
All right.
I can remember when we were winning in red states, right? Winning in the South, in my tenure even here. And part of that was that we found a way to work together more. We unified more. We got together. I can remember this was pre-President Obama, and when you look at the numbers and know that young black folks were voting and carrying the youth vote long before President Obama came along, right? So there was something going right? NAACP got together. I see my sister here from Liz Powell and from American Postal Workers, labor, the traditional organizations, and we were constantly building new institutions so that you brought in that new flavor. But what I've seen in these last decade, there's a lot of division amongst us, whether that be generational, whether that be class, whether that be, and so the realities of figuring out how we find ways to unify in a better way, so that I may be better at this, or you may be better at that, but all of us have something that we're good at, as opposed to in the progressive space where it's very divisive. I saw Tony Harrison out there, can remember. And so what I can remember winning in some of these states like Georgia, and where you could win statewide, is because we had stronger coalitions, and that we were able to figure out how, if you were better in this community than I was, then we were okay to say that with each other. It wasn't that you had to have all of the capacity, but collectively we had more than what we needed. And the late Dr. Ron Walters would also say that who funds your politics controls your politics. And so in 2007, we got together in Atlanta, Georgia, and said, we have to play in the primary. We can't sit back and wait for somebody else to fund us, because they aren't going to fund us to 2 weeks out. So we got together and we raised our own money, right? And we were able to put money into South Carolina and some of these other states that helped President Obama win, if he knew it or not. Right? And so those are the things that I see. And if we, in the time that we're in, it's mandating us to figure out how to put our differences aside and come together in a more strategic way and respect each other enough to know that each of us has something to bring to the table.
Yes, yes. All right, $100 million, Derek. What you gonna do?
The $100 million, okay, if you're unified and you're respected and you're coming together, then you're able to get all of the pieces that you need. Yeah. Everybody's going to get what they need, not throw away money, but be strategic in that. There's no one or two entities that can do it all, right? Everybody has something, and my point is, not just waiting on somebody out there to bring a check, right? It's also doing what Stephanie and them did, and just went ahead and said, damn it, we're going to do it.
Yeah.
And they raised $250,000. Yeah. So somebody ought to have sense enough, if they're strategic and want to invest in winning, to invest in that, double that, triple that. But it can't be waiting on that $500 or $1 million or whatever it is, waiting on the other people to write a check for us. We have to fund our politics. And that's why I'm so excited about, I don't make no money, I'm working for a nonprofit. Right? But I'm going to make sure that I do more to help Stephanie and Quentin do what they need to do, because that's building strategic institutions at a time that's needed, right? Yes. We don't need to wait on the $500 million check. They already got an infrastructure in place. So we need to support Collective PAC, right? Yes. With our money and with the resources that we have. And so that if somebody brings a $500 million check, it wasn't that we were waiting on the $500 million. We may not have had $500 million, because history has shown we don't have that wealth. There's a reason for some of that. But we may have a $5 million already raised money of us, so that people come to us with respect, and not that you're doing something for us, but you're investing in not just yourself, but also we're investing in ourselves as well. Yeah. That's all.
Yeah. Derek, Melanie said she was reclaiming her time.
Thank you. Thank you, sis.
I hear you.
No, I'm going to give it to my brother next to me. We know each other a little longer.
You notice I kept reaching, she kept taking it back.
I
know. Tony Harrison's over there. There's a whole generation that was trained through a pipeline program that came out of the Southern Regional Council. Southern Regional Council also had a training for those who got elected on how to govern. The problem that happened is it was too much dependent on foundations to support Southern Regional Council. So when the foundation's agenda changed, Southern Regional Council closed the door. $100 million can endow that type of approach. Because if you look from Louisiana, Mississippi, all across to the Carolinas, there's a whole generation of people who all came through that pipeline or are still in office or just retired from office. So pipelining becomes important. Understanding once we get you elected, how to govern is even more important. Second, control of the narrative. We talk from a deficit model even when we're winning. And because we talk from a deficit model, we assume what's very possible is impossible. We are winning in the South.
That's right.
Even if we're not winning statewide elections, we're not winning statewide elections because there's more of them than us. And race controls politics. You, in the southern states, if you put race in front of an argument, people vote against their interests. But the demographics are showing us that that's breaking up. And more importantly, the other part of the endowment is a research component. We assume what were the politics 20 years ago is going to be the politics tomorrow. The demographics is showing us the machinery of Washington, D.C. is no more. We're talking about Maryland. The machinery of Atlanta is no more. We're talking about the greater Atlanta area. Because as black folks are pushed out of cities, we need to show the research to identify where we used to win these legislative seats, but the demographics not showing up. Now we need to be focusing on these areas over here. So we don't have a research component so we can have the proper targets. Oftentimes we are adopting other people's concepts of where we should be and overlooking our opportunities. Detroit is a great example. We learned that more people voted in Detroit than we suspected, but a good number of them didn't vote for the top of the ticket. They voted, but they skipped over the presidential ballot. We can no longer allow individual candidates to control our politics because we're getting to a place where if it's the same stale message or no message at all, then people would just as well not vote on a candidate of either party, even though long-term it'd be to their detriment. Well, if we don't have the proper pipelining and understand how to govern, if we don't control our message, that's the communication piece, and if we're not doing the proper research, we leave our community vulnerable just to operate from impulse.
Yeah.
The message is, I'm with her. What's that message? That's not a message of hope. And when there is a vacuum of message, people fall to the prevailing message of fear. See, our oppositions, they run on fear, we run on hope. I'm with her is neither fear or hope, therefore people sit down and we lose Michigan. And so $100 million, endow, not spend, endow, a pipelining and training program so people can understand how to govern when they get elected. Endow a communication shop so we can control the narrative and have a forward-thinking narrative and not a deficit mindset narrative, and endow a research arm so we can identify where we should play and how we should play and how we communicate with those we play with, be it all black or coalition politics.
All right. $100 million.
100 million. Let's see here. 10 million to spark innovation and digitize our black newspapers around the country. Create incentives for them. They're already there, but they're sitting on church vestibules and in barbershops, and there are already networks. We already have these. Again, we have what we need. We need to support and improve what we already have in many cases. So I would focus on our black newspapers. I would put some towards black creators, young folks who are already mastering the visual arts and music and social media and empower them to tell the stories of black candidates and causes and issues and create some funding for them. I would take a big chunk and create a financial incentive for all of our major religious, civil rights, labor organizations to do a joint summer convention. in a presidential election year. I know, skeptical, quizzical, just one time in a strategic state. Again, the financial incentives are going to be important, right, in Georgia.
Right.
Financial incentives are going to be important because folks need to know that they will leave that space whole and be able to do what they need to do. But we have so many, it goes back to Melanie's point, we have so many phenomenal organizations with different priorities, but sometimes the same mission and goals, but we often work at cross purposes. So let's just one summer, I don't know when it can be, 2022, 2024. One summer we'll get all together and make sure we tap into and mobilize folks at the same time. So those are a few things off the top of my head.
I love that. Y'all are
That
taking
one's gonna be
notes, right? For
expensive,
whoever
so-
has a $100 million check. Okay,
And then
great.
I'll cut a check to Quentin and Steph and Judy and Mel and NAA
Yes.
and Rashad Robinson and all these folks that are already doing, Barbara Skinner, again, the folks are out there, but we have to support them. So that a lot of folks would be getting a piece of that pie. Yeah.
Awesome, awesome.
So I'm going to push back on something I heard, but that's okay because we're still all family. Only because I think it leads, there are two things that I think are connected to each other, one of which is the I'm with her message, which I actually think has more to do, I'll speak for myself, has more to do with maybe the disconnect that I felt between the candidate and the message. So I think sometimes we have to look at what messages actually work for what candidates. But I also want to state, which is connected to something that Joshua had mentioned about why is it so hard for people in his own family to see Stacey as somebody that can govern their communities. So I'm going to spend one quick moment and say that some investment needs to go into how we talk about some of both, not only racial oppression, but sometimes how we look at women as leaders. We are seen as voters, but we still have some work to do as to why we're not always with Keisha, or why we're not always with Tamika, or why we're not always with somebody who may have been born as something else and now lives in a different reality. We need to tackle that within our own community.
Yes.
And I say that there are investments that I think are more in-house, and then there are some that are actually more structural, right? I'm gonna have Jamal, I know he's tired, he's probably sleeping because he's been training for 2 weeks, but raise your hand again. Data is expensive. So there are actual investments that need to be made that we are completely out of the game when it comes to what it costs to get one laptop that has everything from SQL to Excel to Maptitude to all of these things that people are making consultant coins off of, that are doing mapping and polling. But the thing is, they don't have the knowledge that we have about our community. So they will create models based on a monolithic view of African Americans within a demographic, but they don't actually have experiences as to whether it's right or not. And guess what? They're gonna get the check anyway. So we actually need to start looking at what is in the game and how much it costs. And then
Yes.
we need to actually invest in that. And then we need to connect those that, you know what, maybe they won't be the next CEO at Exxon, but we know that if we train a young person that comes back from juvenile detention facility and they're trained in data, they have literally disrupted, not only contributed to our political atmosphere, but they have now changed the economic trajectory for their family. So we actually need to have some multi-purpose strategies that are not just about we need to win in 2018. We actually really need to start also looking at how we connect people to 2017, which is also something that is disheartening because between Georgia and New Jersey, there are actually some, Virginia and New Jersey, there are actually some things that we should be doing right now, regardless of whether we live in those states or not. I also think that we need to also invest in more lawyers of color. I know a lot of people have, really focused on ACLU, and ACLU, understandably. I also will say that I had a big problem with ACLU's stance post-Charlottesville, which is not uncommon for ACLU when it comes to the protection of the First Amendment, and I get it. But there are some things that the law can't fix by themselves, that politicians can't fix by themselves. But there's something that you come in when you are a lawyer of color, that yes, I understand that free speech or that hate speech is protected under the First Amendment, but I also understand that a rally is also an incident or badge of slavery, which is a violation of the 13th Amendment.
Yes.
So we actually need to look at the things that are there to remind us of our prior state as enslaved individuals and challenge those things and recognize that there are attorneys right now that do have that perspective and are able to creatively create those arguments in the courtrooms with redistricting that's coming up, which is something we need to look at, with the census that's coming up, which is something that we need to look at. That doesn't happen by magic. That happens by investing in people that have the tools right now to do those things. Some of the other things were already said, but I also want to be a little bit creative and say that if there is somebody out there with $100 million, maybe we should look at some of the HBCUs that we have right now and look at funding them with a different purpose. I love the Charles Hamilton Houston way of looking at attorneys, the way he looked at Howard and some of these other institutions as individuals that come out as either social engineers or as parasites. And I think we actually need to look at what would it look like if we had an institution, not just a pipeline, schools that literally pushed out Black prosecutors, Black lawyers, Black researchers, all towards liberation, all towards trying to get us free. If I had $100 million right now, I would put $100 million in the University of Freedom right now, because I think that if we can get young people knowing that there's a school out there that's going to help them prepare to improve their lives, not the lives of people that already are beyond the 1%, then I think we will start changing things that are beyond just one election or one-offs and transactional relationships between our vote and the next election, which is exhausting. We're all going to put the same energy in 2018 that we put in 2020, for some of us 2014. Like, we're doing this every couple of years. That is exhausting. At some point, it's not about the vote making us free. We have to find ways for the entire universe of our skills to help us get free. So now that we're up to like $1 billion.
We got it.
And
we
by
got
the
it.
way, I'm going to give you some money for that lawyer thing, because, you know, I'm in total agreement with that. Because when I think about this moment and I think about the whole discussion about resistance, like, first of all, Black people, we have always been the resistance in this country. This is nothing new for us. And when I think about, you know, the moment that we're in and who we're turning to say, help us get free, it's not going to work that way. And we're, you know, I've seen on Facebook all my, you know, I mean, no shade to ACLU, you know, they're my friends. But, you know, I've seen a lot of people on Facebook talking, friends saying, oh, I'm going to give money, I'm becoming a member. And I'm like, y'all applaud, if, you know, me when I put something up about Advancement Project and say, you're doing such great work, but do you give me 1 penny when I have to raise over $7 million a year? You know, but no, instead you're going to become a member of the ACLU when there is a Black woman-led legal organization that can't get the support from Black people to do Black people work.
Yes.
So, I mean, you know, so this leads me to what I would do with the $100 million, which is we need political education. We have to spend some time with our people. You know, we say to white folks, get your cousins. We need to get our cousins. So part of that political education to me would come through spending, putting money into organizing, just on the ground organizing. When I think about all the incredible groups that we get to support at Advancement Project, like Dream Defenders in Florida, and Power U, which is a youth organizing group, you know, and groups like New Georgia Project, who does a lot of work around voter registration, et cetera, in Georgia. You know, there are groups who are doing incredible work, but they need the infrastructure to expand the scope of their work so that we don't leave our people behind. Because we can be inside the Beltway having a conversation about Black political power and talking about candidates that our people don't connect with.
Yes.
Because too often we're talking about the candidate and not the issues that people care about.
Yeah.
So I would spend the money on building a troop of soldiers who care about the issues and then who will move into the political realm. Because our people right now are suffering. Mm-hmm. And we're having some theoretical conversations across the country and not dealing with the suffering. And again, that gets us back to the resistance. We've always been the resistance. We've always been suffering. So we've got to turn inward. And I think that Derek's point about endowment, I was on the board of an organization called the 21st Century Foundation, which went out of business. It was a Black foundation that was founded in 1968 in order to build money, take money from Black people to give to Black people's issues. Did you hear me say it went out of business? Out of business. It was because Black people did not invest in Black issues and in Black organizations. We had to start turning towards the same foundations that we were set up to compete with because they weren't supporting Black issues. We had to start turning towards them for support. And so if we don't start to realize that we ain't gonna get free with somebody else leading the way for us and paying and footing the bill for us, then we're not gonna get there. And so I would put money into a foundation. I'd do all the things that everybody else up here said, but that's why I need $1 billion, not $100 million.
Yes, all right. So if you have a question, give our panelists a huge round of applause. If you have a question, please, if you are able, move towards the middle to the microphone. If you prefer to raise your hand, I would be happy to call on you from